I've got to be honest with you, when I looked at the preaching roster and I saw my name against that topic of work, I was like, oh man, really? Come on, Matt, can't you give me something more exciting to preach about, Really? Come on. But of course, the more that I process this out, and the more I gained a sense of what God might be wanting to speak into us this morning, I got really excited about this. It's going to be a really great challenge for us this morning as we consider that. And it's a really relevant topic for us, isn't it, really? When you think about, most of us would spend more time working, at work or at school and then at home and in other spaces. We'd spend more time working than we would doing just about anything else. So it's a very relevant topic. Now, throughout the book of Proverbs, the work-related issue that comes up is this issue here of laziness. And the importance of being diligent instead of lazy. Now, I'm not really sure why Solomon makes such a big issue of that. I mean, I don't ever struggle with laziness myself, and I'm sure none of you ever do. Like don't really get it at all, Solomon. Joking, of course. Solomon makes a big issue with laziness because it's an issue for just about every single one of us. Even those of us who would dare classify ourselves as workaholics, because ultimately workaholism might look like diligence, but it's not diligence at all. I mean, it's not diligence that compels us to become workaholics or neat freaks or gym junkies, where our priorities get a little bit messed up. Because that's what those words and those phrases suggest, that our priorities are a little bit messed up because we feel compelled to do those things too much. It's ultimately a lack of diligence, a laziness, if you like, that by which we allow ourselves to be controlled by compulsion. Does that make sense? So diligence is a thing of conscientiousness and eagerness and persistence that steers us away from that kind of behavior and towards prioritizing what's good and right in our lives. And so the issue of work in the book of Proverbs is a really relevant one, and it's first and foremost concerned with having us understand that it's wise to be diligent. It's wise to be diligent. And more specifically is, if we are wise enough to understand and see things as they really are, then we wouldn't want to be anything other than diligent. And because similar to what Matt has been saying over the last couple of weeks about sexuality and money, this is not an abstract moral issue. Right? Laziness is wrong because it's actually wrong for us. It doesn't work for us to be lazy. We weren't wired that way. And diligence is right for us because it's right for us. Because we have been wired that way. It says in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 4, that a sluggard's appetite, so a sluggard, by the way, is the personification of laziness. The book of Proverbs does that, a bit of personification of these things. So a sluggard's appetite is never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. So laziness is kind of like that mosquito bite. You itch it, but it just keeps getting itchy. It doesn't stop getting itchy because you itch it. It gets itchier usually. It doesn't bring about the satisfaction. Laziness does not bring about satisfaction and fulfillment in our lives because we weren't wired that way. When God created us, He created us in His image, right? And in the same way that God Himself is a diligent worker. So when He created us, and remember, this is before the fall, right? When He created us, it says in Genesis 2, that He put us in the garden to work it and take care of it. So right from the very beginning, there was that purpose on our lives. And you and I have been wired for work. We've been designed to be diligent in the way that we go about that work. That's our makeup. We're wired for work, designed to be diligent. Sound like catchy sermon titles, don't they? Actually, I should say, Robbie and I had a chat about this a couple of days ago about the way we brand our sermon series and title our messages and so on. And the idea of moving towards things that are a little bit more catchy came up. Unfortunately, the only thing I could come up with at the time was, it's crazy to be lazy. And I thought that might be too much too soon. Yeah, crazy people like Timmy get really offended by that. So. Wired for work, designed to be diligent, would have probably been really good ideas if I thought them at the time. So anyway, today's message we've titled, Wisdom That Works. In any case, the point I make here is that laziness comes with this illusion. It comes to this absolute illusion that somehow we can find fulfillment and satisfaction in not doing anything. And yet we discover through our own experiences of laziness that satisfaction never comes that way. A sluggard's appetite is never filled. Never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. On the flip side, it's actually probably really helpful for us to understand where this is an issue for us in the first place, ultimately because of what happened to us in the garden, where we rebelled against God. Using the language that Matt used a couple of weeks ago when he was talking about our sexuality, that we're all broken people and we're all disoriented as a result. So our tendency towards laziness is a thing of disorientation. And in Proverbs chapter 6, Solomon used this great little illustration to point out how disoriented we really are. And he tries to shake some sense into us as he does that. He says this: go to the ant, you sluggard. He says, come over and take a look at this ant. He says, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, and yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. He's saying, look at how wise the ant is behaving in comparison to you. It doesn't, and think about it, like the ant, it doesn't have anyone keeping it accountable. It doesn't have a supervisor, a boss. It doesn't have a Bible to tell it what it should be doing or a preacher to preach it. It doesn't have a mate come alongside and go, yeah, good job, buddy. You're doing so good. Keep up the good work. It doesn't have some sort of like incentive package where it gets to live in a better place on the anthill out of working really hard and diligently. Right? It doesn't have any of that because it doesn't need any of that. It's not disoriented like we are. Wisdom calls us. The wisdom of Proverbs, for starters, calls us out of our disorientation. To learn from the ant, to understand that we're made, this is the way that we were wired, to be productive and fruitful and diligent in the way that we go about that way. Hands up if you're already starting to feel a little bit challenged. See a few people sinking down in their seats there. Or maybe imagining that. Another interesting illustration that we find in the book of Proverbs is that of a vineyard in Proverbs 24, where it says this: I went past the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. So we're now no longer looking at a little ant, we're looking at a field, at a vineyard. And this is what he notices about it. He says, thorns had come up everywhere, the ground was covered in weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I applied my heart to what I observed, and I learned a lesson from what I saw. What do you reckon the lesson was? I'll tell you, the lesson was this. Ultimately, laziness doesn't just result in things not getting done. It doesn't just result in a lack of grapevines in our vineyard. More often than not, laziness also results in things going to ruin in our lives. It results in weeds and thorns taking over, fences falling down, fences that are meant to keep out wild animals, and so on. It's in Proverbs 18 verse 9, we're told this, that one who is slack in his work is brother to the one who destroys. One who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys. He's saying a slack person is a brother, in other words, is very similar to, so is like of the same DNA, if you like, to a person who deliberately destroys stuff. So again, Solomon's been really pointed about this. He says, imagine for a moment this guy, right? Someone who intentionally sabotages their marriage, who abuses his children, embezzles funds from his workplace, vandalizes his house, deliberately smashes his car, and so on. I mean, someone who's just always destroying stuff. He's saying that person is on par with a lazy person. And I mean, ultimately, a lazy person may not have the same intent, but gets the same end result. Because marriages, children, businesses, houses, cars, just about everything that God has entrusted us with in this world needs our diligence to survive and thrive. And for many of us here, this is exactly where we need to be challenged. Because there are things in our lives that are suffering from neglect. There are things that aren't what they should be because we haven't been conscientious and persistent and eager. We haven't worked diligently at those things. Going back to the passage about the ant in Proverbs 6, after Solomon brings us over to the ant, he says, see this ant. See how it's diligently doing what it should be doing. He says this straight after it in verse 9. He says, how long will you lie there, sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. Pretty confronting about it, isn't he? He's a king, I guess. He's used to kind of pointing the finger and just saying it how it is. Just say it bold as you like. But mind you, I think there's a bit of a play on words there where he says a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, because those of us who struggle with laziness know that's exactly what we say when we're in that moment. The least to ourselves, I just need a little bit more. Press the snooze on the alarm clock. We watch a little bit more TV. Scroll on Facebook just a little bit longer, and so on. So it's a bit of a play on words there where he uses that terminology, just a little bit of sleep and rest. The direct challenge there is actually how long will you lie there? Because Solomon isn't saying we shouldn't sleep or rest. Absolutely we should. I mean, rest is important. It has a place in the rhythm of life. Rhythm is part of God's wisdom. This is the thing that we understand about God and about the way that He's structured everything is that the rhythm is very much a part of His wisdom for us in the way that we live. It's a bit like breathing in and breathing out. There's a rhythm to that, and some of us need to learn the rhythm of resting. Some of us don't do well with rest because you can't let go. You can't trust God with what you can't get done. Or maybe you're too busy building your tower or digging your burrow or whatever. And there's a sense of maybe trying to make a name for yourself. Or if I let it go, I'm letting go of control. And again, this takes us back to what I said about the workaholic and the clean freak and the gym junkie. I mean, about these things that drive us beyond diligence to a place where our priorities are messed up. Where we lose that rhythm, like we're trying to breathe out more than we're breathing in, and it simply doesn't work for us to do that. You can't function that way for long without things going terribly wrong. And one of our greatest priorities is the need for rest. And in fact, at different times in our week, we need different types of rest. And sometimes we need physical rest. Sometimes we need a rest from people, like Jesus did when he got away from the crowd. Sometimes we need to rest our heart and mind, like every night before bedtime. That works, that we have to do that, and so on. And diligence, this is what diligence leads us to. Diligence is about being wise and deliberate about what kind of rest that we get and how and when to have that rest that we need. So rest is important, but the thing that I think we need to understand here is that rest is not the end game. It's not the goal, right? Laziness is based on a mindset that says that it is, but it's not, and it can't be. It's a bit like when Jesus said man wasn't made for the Sabbath was made for man. But in God, when he made us to be obviously creative and productive and fruitful, he made us for that purpose, not so that we could rest. I mean, he made rest for us so that we could fulfill our purpose in life. We don't work so that we can rest. We rest so that we can work. I mean, think about this. When God created the universe in 6 days, did he do it so that he could rest on the seventh? No, it's a ridiculous suggestion, isn't it? Of course he didn't. The seventh day wasn't the end goal. The 6 days of creation were. I mean, you see, in creation, God not only modeled what it looks like for us to enjoy a day of rest every week, but he also models for us his true purpose and intention for us. People made in his image to be creative and fruitful and productive. The one other passage from Proverbs I thought it really be helpful for us this morning to consider is from Proverbs chapter 12. And this is particularly interesting because I think for a lot of us, at least we perceive the biggest issue for us in our workplace is the issue of stress. Where we really managing stress is a difficult thing for us. And similarly in the home, around that big long list of things that need to be done, and particularly where one family member needs to ask another family member, to do something they probably should have already done. Does that happen in your family? That's the number one cause of stress in my household, I tell you that. So is. Yeah. Yeah, stress, just thinking about that. And what Solomon does here is kind of highlight to us how laziness and diligence play a big part in that for us. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 24, he says this: diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. What does he mean by that? Well, a bit like last week when Matt said about the danger of having money as our master instead of us mastering our money. Solomon is saying diligence puts us in charge over our responsibilities in life, over all the things that we should do and need to do and are right to do for us. Diligence puts us in charge, in the something seat. What is it? Driver's seat. I'm just trying to engage you all, I didn't actually forget that at all. So diligence has us in that place of being in control, if you like. And laziness puts our responsibilities in charge over us. And so one of the reasons why laziness is an unsatisfying and even stressful place to be is because as much as we might try in our laziness, we might try to hide from the things that we really should be doing, eventually our circumstances and other people sometimes are forced to impose those things on us. And that's a recipe for stress, right? Isn't it? A heart that says, I don't want to do anything, and an externally opposed set of responsibilities forced upon us. And so diligence, on the other hand, is complete opposite of that. And not just because the responsibilities aren't being externally imposed, but inwardly there's something different going on as well. Inwardly, in here, in the heart and mind, the diligent thing to do, of course, is that we seek God and we seek to understand what's good and right, and we prioritize and we decide how we're going to spend our time and energy. And as a result of that kind of focus, diligence leads us to becoming passionate and purposeful and energized in all that we do. Does that make sense? And this is what Solomon means when he says, diligent hands will rule. Rule in life. They'll be in the driver's seat here. It's always more stressful being a passenger, isn't it? Depends who's driving. But if it's our responsibilities driving, it's stressful, right? But laziness ends in forced labor, he says. It makes some pretty good arguments for the whole laziness versus diligence thing, doesn't he? Hands up if you still want to be lazy. No. Just checking. None of you are just being too lazy to put your hand up? No. Actually, maybe a better question than this is this. Instead of being lazy, you'd like to be a diligent and passionate and purposeful and energized person in all that you do. Hands up if that's you. Yeah. Quite seriously, if that's you, let me leave you with a couple of things today that the Apostle Paul brings to this conversation. I mean, one of the things that Paul is really big on in his letters is diligence. And not just diligence in doing things, but also, just as we've been talking about, this idea of diligence of heart and mind behind what we do. Of seeking God, of setting our focus on the right thing, of being rooted and established in love, and being mindful of our higher purpose in life. He was always saying things like, set your mind on things above. Whatever is true and right and admirable, think about such things. And ultimately, that's how he got to become the kind of guy that was content. He says, I've learned to be content. It was a process. He was content, whatever the circumstance, and was able to rejoice and give thanks always. And he persisted through all kinds of hardship and persecution to spread the good news about Jesus. And he was able to do all of that because ultimately he was diligent in setting the focus of his heart and mind on the right thing. See, the heart of a lazy person is like a void that fills up with frustration and fear and annoyance when it has to do something. It knows nothing of the kind of focus that Paul had. It's a bit like what we were talking before about this disorientation, that from the fall we were disoriented towards laziness, and it doesn't make sense, but we don't really like, we don't even reflect the wisdom of an ant sometimes. But Paul shows us what it actually looks like through spiritual maturity in Christ to be reoriented in diligence and to be passionate and purposeful and energized as a result. Have a read of this, Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 and 23. It says, servants, do what you're told by your earthly mothers as well, sorry. Freudian slip there. Do your job, he says. Do as you've been employed to do. And don't just do the minimum that will get you by. Just do your best. Be diligent. Do your best. Work from the heart for your real master, for God. Confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. Keep in mind always. So just keep in mind. It's a sense of diligence about what's going on up here. Keep in mind always that the ultimate master you're serving is Christ. If you're here 4 weeks ago when I kicked off the series, you may remember I talked about there being two different types of wisdom. A me-centered wisdom. Wisdom revolves around pleasing me, which really isn't wisdom at all. Looks like wisdom, but it's foolishness. And wisdom that revolves around pleasing God. It's a God-centered wisdom. Pleasing God, loving others. And what Paul demonstrates here is exactly that. Exactly that in his teaching. That God God-centered wisdom that leads to us diligently loving and serving others. A wisdom that you and I are called to a higher purpose, because everything is from God and for God. A higher purpose that reflects who we are in Christ. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, Paul says, as a new creation in Christ, that we are God's workmanship, that we are created in Christ to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And so way beyond our workplaces, our homes, even our friends and family, you and I are called to be diligent co-workers with Jesus in building his kingdom here on earth. You and I have this higher purpose to live for, and a spiritual capacity to live that out. I mean, because even over and above that original way that we were wired to work and designed to be diligent as children of God, we have his spiritual DNA. And as that matures in us, we become more and more like him, more loving, more passionate, more diligent, more eager and persistent and conscientious in our calling. The question is, are we allowing God to do that in us? Are we choosing to be diligent in fulfilling our part of that process, or are we deliberately hanging on to laziness? Are we choosing to stay disoriented? We're going to sing a song now, and it's just another opportunity for us to continue to process. What does this mean for me? You know, how do I respond to this? Or what, you know, am I in that process of where laziness is behind me and diligence is before me? And that God is, you know, day by day transforming me into his image, where more and more I'm like him in that way. And that's the question. And as we process that, as we sing, as we respond, how about you stand? And there's an opportunity to respond at the end.